Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Welcome back to another episode of the Work From Home Show. I'm your host, Naresh Vissa, and along with me today is Adam and a very special guest. His name is Mitch Russo. Mitch Russo is the CEO of Mindful Guidance, the former CEO of Business Breakthroughs International, where he worked alongside Chet Holmes and Tony Robbins to build a $25 million business from his spare bedroom. He co-founded his first business, Timeslips Corp, from his garage, which grew to become the largest time tracking software company in the world. In 1994, Timeslips Corp was sold to Sage for 8 figures. And while at Sage, Mitch went on to run all of Sage U.S. as Chief Operating Officer, a division with 300 people with a market cap in excess of $100 million. Mitch was nominated for Inc. magazine's Entrepreneur of the Year on 2 separate occasions, both in 1989 and 1991, and he won Best Entrepreneur in 1989 from a list of 4,000 other entries by the National Association of Legal Vendors. He is the author of the book, which we're going to talk about on today's episode, called The Invisible Organization: How Ingenious CEOs Are Creating Thriving Virtual Companies. Mitch, welcome to the Work From Home Show.
My pleasure to be here and excited to dig in with you guys.
So, Mitch, I have to ask before we get started, you were nominated in 89 and 91. What were you doing in 90?
Oh, I know. I was slacking off, obviously. Well, it's funny because, the nominations, it's kind of a political thing, and I didn't really see the value of doing it, but my staff pushed me into getting it done. So we got the nomination in 1989, and it was kind of an interesting and fun experience because you get to go to this huge banquet dinner. I mean, just being nominated is like a huge deal, and they honor you for being nominated, and then they pick a winner. And so the date of that is critical. If you don't show up, you can't win. So in 1990, it turns out that we were doing a launch of our Macintosh product, and I was going to be in the UK. I was going to be in London. So that was why we didn't apply for the 1990 award.
Well, Mitch, part of the reason why I invited you to be a guest on our show, your bio, your background is pretty incredible. And what makes it even better is the 2 primary business you founded. One was founded in your spare bedroom, so it was at your house. And the other business was founded in your garage, so also in your house. Tell us kind of how you started it during the 80s, too. It looks like during the 80s and 90s, pre-internet. Tell us how you started these businesses from your home. What was the genesis of them?
Well, the first business probably was the most challenging because I didn't know really anything about business. All I knew was that the world was changing. And this will ring true every time I tell the story, no matter what year we're in it. It always rings true. You wake up one day and you realize, my goodness, the world is changing and I'm getting left behind. What do I do? And I look around and I see this kid named Bill Gates, and he just invented this operating system for this tiny little microprocessor-based computer, and it's exploding. It's going nuts. I said, you know what? I feel like I got to get into this business somehow, but I didn't know how. So the first thing I did was I bought a computer. I figured, well, let me at least start learning about this new PC platform. And so that's what I did. And then what started to happen is that I had to deal with the problems of my current business. I was a salesman. I was selling semiconductors. I had customers. I had clients who, needed samples of our newest products, but I had to keep track of those samples. So I said, well, I got to build a database to do that. So that was really my first project, which was to figure out how to use the computer, build a database, keep track of stuff in a database, and make it responsive. Well, that began for me the journey into understanding how PCs evolve into businesses. So I had this idea for a product because the PC itself could not be deducted from my taxes. My accountant told me that. So I said, okay, well, then what I'll do is I'll get a software program that keeps track of my time so I could deduct it, because after all, it's expensive. It was like $3,000. Well, there was no program to do that. So, okay, necessity being the mother of invention, I figured if there's no program, everyone's going to want this, so I'll invent it. And that's how we started our software business. But something happened, and this is another familiar tale you'll hear from many people who start companies. The thing that happened was that after we built this incredible new product called TaxKick, by the way, after we built this incredible new product, after we quit our jobs, after we wrote the manual, after we were ready to launch, the IRS removed its ruling on record keeping. So we were now, you've heard of burning the boats, I'm sure. Well, we had burned the boats. We were on the island. The boats were gone, and we had already quit our jobs. So we had to pivot. We had to figure out how to go from where we were to someplace new, and we had to do it really quickly. And so we brainstormed. We thought of all different things until finally we came up with the idea, wait a minute, who else needs to keep track of time and potentially even bill it? Well, that was lawyers, that was accountants. We said, okay, well, we can modify the software to do that. And that was Neil's job. That was my partner's job. And he said, I can take care of that. I'll do that. And my job was to rewrite the manual, to rewrite all the press releases, was to restart the entire marketing and sales process. And so that's what I did. Well, we hibernated for 3 more months and working from our homes. We had no income other than what we had in savings. And 3 months later, we launched Timeslips. Now, Timeslips back then was a PC software product. One of the selling points is that it would operate without a hard drive on 2 floppy disks, which, believe it or not, was a big deal back then. And it evolved from there. That ended up, without telling you every twist and turn, which many were very exciting, we ended up 9 years later coming up with a proposition to sell the company for 8 figures. And we decided that, we were at this for, 9 years. It was okay. It was time to sell. A lot of money. We were willing to do it. But really for me, there was so much I learned in those 9 years, but I didn't realize I was about to learn a whole lot more now, having sold my company and being part of a much larger public company, and then eventually running a part of that public company, which is the U.S. division, as chief operating officer. So the whole experience from start to finish, yes, it started in my garage, but it evolved into something very much more bigger and rewarding.
So what were whenever you started, you were obviously bringing in people who had been working in offices for their entire lives. What were some of the issues that you experienced with bringing employees in who'd been in the office beforehand? What were the kind of the growing pains there?
Well, probably the simplest way to put it, there's really one word, and that's culture. We had the culture of a startup, and the culture of a startup is do everything. So multitask like crazy, don't take a break, work for forever, every hour of every day, every minute of every hour, and start over again on Monday. And so that culture clashed with these MBAs who were coming to interview, who worked for, a bigger company and wanted to work for a startup because they thought it was quote unquote exciting. Well, we determined very quickly that it would be better sometimes to hire people even without degrees, most of the time without degrees, who were just excited about working for a company and getting busy and being valuable. Making somebody feel valuable is, in many cases, more important than that incremental extra few dollars when you're bringing people into a startup. That was my experience.
So now moving on, Mitch, from your first business to the business Breakthroughs International, which I guess you started it with Chet Holmes and Tony Robbins, or maybe they came on later as your business partners. That was founded from your spare bedroom. Walk us through that and how you grew that company.
Well, after I sold Timeslips Corporation, I moved back to Massachusetts because that's where my network was. And I wanted to reemerge in that network. 4 years later, I had accomplished with all of my other friends who were all software CEOs were trying to do. So I thought no better place than to go back and help them get their company set up and sold, packaged, valued, and sold. And that's what I decided to do. So I moved back to Massachusetts and I reemerged into that entire environment. And I did a lot of work with companies to help them and get them sold. And I was able to participate in some of the rewards of that. And ultimately for me, that's, I then spent years helping companies figure out their value proposition, understand their place in the ecosystem they played in, positioned it correctly, valued it correctly, understood what affected that value. Again, huge learning experience. And as much as I enjoyed that, what I really wanted to do, I realized, was I really wanted to be part of something bigger. And that's another important element of why people like startups, because there's this dream that it's going to take over the world, that it's going to dominate an industry, and people want to be part of something bigger. And it's very valid. There's no reason why they wouldn't want that. So at that point, I happened to be an options trader, and I was trading options quite successfully and helping companies at the same time. And I get a phone call one day from my old buddy, Chet Holmes. Now, Chet and I met while I was building Timeslips Corporation, and he was a salesman trying to sell me advertising space. And after being bugged by him for over a year, I eventually decided, yes, I'll go with your company and I'll buy advertising. Turned out to be a great decision. We were able to use those ads to really establish ourselves in our market. But we stayed in touch. We became close friends, and we talked every week. And one week in particular, he's telling me the story of how one particular person in his little consulting firm is giving him a hard time. And I don't know why I said this. I said, well, let me speak to him. And he said, what are you talking about? You don't even know him. I said, I just want to find out what this guy's problem is. Give me his phone number. So he said, yeah, all right, fine. But, don't expect anything. He probably doesn't even know who you are. So I called this guy up and I said, look, what are you doing? Why are you bugging my friend Chet? Why are you giving him such a hard time? And he went on to tell me he just wouldn't shut up, how Chet wants him to do everything. He doesn't have time. He's like a one-man band. I said, okay, what's the hardest thing you're doing, the thing you'd want to take off your plate? And he said, recruiting new salespeople. I just don't have time. So, and again, I don't know what possessed me. I just said, okay, I'll do that. Now, will you stop bugging Chet? And he said, okay, if you're going to do it, that's fine. Well, I didn't know how to recruit salespeople. I mean, I knew in general, but I didn't have a skill or a process set up. So I called Chet. I said, I got good news and I got bad news. Which do you want first? And he said, what's the good news? I said, the good news is that, your buddy Ted's not going to be bothering you anymore. He said, well, what's the bad news? I said, meet your new recruiter. He goes, oh, okay. I said, but Chet, I don't really know. I mean, I like I said, I kind of know how, but how do you want me to recruit these people? He says, oh, just read chapter 5 in my book, chapter 4 in my book. I said, okay, that's fine. So I read the chapter, and it's really smart. It's well laid out. There's great information in there, but there's no process. Now, I'm an electrical engineer. Process is part of my life. So I then decided to create a process, and I did. And in a matter of 6 weeks, we had tripled his sales force. And I had identified a person who could take over as manager. So I called up Chet, and I said, Chet, your sales force has tripled. Everything's going great. Your guys are making money, and here's a guy who's going to run it for you. I'm done. And he says, wait a minute. What do you mean you're done? I said, well, you don't need me anymore. I just did exactly what you asked me to do. And he says, "Well, I gotta send you some money." I said, "No. We're friends. You don't charge friends. That's not the nature of friendships." He goes, "Well, listen, I have a check here for $18,000 with your name on it. What do you expect me to do with this?" I said, "Well, I told you, Chet, we're friends." He says, "Listen, it's not like I'm paying you. You earned this money." I said, "How did I earn it?" He goes, the way you earned it is because I pay a percentage of every sale the people you hired made. Now, do you want it or not?" I said, "All right, send it along." And that became the slippery slope. Now, Chet and I were in business together, and it was a dream come true because we always wanted to do something like this. So I ran the recruiting division because, after all, that's what I was doing. Soon thereafter, Chet asked me to be the president and run the company, which I did. Soon thereafter, he said to me, "My dream has come true. I finally have a conversation with the amazing Tony Robbins. But I'd like for you to join me on that conversation." I said, "Sure." So we get on the phone with Tony, and we start building the idea of creating a company together. And we did this every Thursday night for almost 6 months. And we came up with the idea. We came up with the process. We came up with the launch. We came up with everything. And 6 months later, we held an event in Las Vegas. We filled the event with 500 people in about 6 weeks. And we recorded in 4 days over 60 hours of training material, which later became our core product. And all of this happened while I was on the phone or working on the web and on the phone from my spare bedroom. I didn't need an office. I didn't need a copy machine. Neither did anybody else. So at that point, Chet's little consulting firm, which was him and a few other people, became a 300-person organization completely run virtually. And the problem is that we needed systems, because you can't run any type of a company without systems. And that's where the challenge came in. And that's where we had to build and create the systems that would sustain this company over the coming years. So that's how that ended up happening.
So do you think that systems can make a company of any size work virtually, or do you think there's kind of a threshold that when you hit a certain number, you're going to need an office and people should come in?
Okay, so my belief, and it's one that I've held for many years, is that being virtual can actually work for every company. Now, obviously not for a restaurant or a dentist's office, but parts of a restaurant or a dentist's office can be virtual. Every company should have a virtual component. Why? Because it's smart and it saves money. Now, you might think of, well, look, airline pilots can't be virtual. And of course not. I mean, that goes without saying. Right now, ultimately, maybe all planes will be autonomous. Maybe there'll be pilots sitting in towers instead of in cockpits. But the point here is that ideally, what we're talking about is making sure that every single company looks at their operation and says, how can we send our people home who will be more efficient, be happier, and be more productive? And I think every company can do that.
What's the industry that surprised you most that hasn't gone virtual?
Well, there's so many. I'll tell you a funny industry that has just become virtual in the last few years, the meat packing industry. Now, I remember when I first wrote the book, I got a call from some guy in downtown New York at the Lower East Side of New York. They had a meat packing company, and the reason they called me is because, they had outgrown their facility, and those types of facilities are grandfathered in, meaning to build a new one would cost like $100 million or something, but the one they had was okay. And so what we started doing is we started looking at the operation department by department and sending those people home. We had reclaimed 20% of the space inside that facility by sending home their marketing people, their salespeople, their accounting people. We had done so much to get them to the point. Then finally they saw how they could now expand the entire building into production and save them a fortune. You know, when we started working with Tony Robbins, made the observation that, hey, you know, Tony, you have this office full of people. You know, why don't you do what we do? We have all these systems in place. We could show you how to use them so that you could work from home. And he saved $1 million in not renewing an agreement to rent a particular piece of property, real estate. So there are still a few places, like if, for example, insurance companies. Now, it's changed rapidly, but for example, these offices that are all over the country, maybe all over the world, they're insurance companies. It's people selling insurance or basically working with the home office. Well, now they're all virtual. Airlines used to, I don't know, years ago, maybe you didn't realize this, but years ago, there used to be buildings called call centers, filled with operators. They're all virtual. So there are very few that are left that haven't experimented with or begun the process and are the most impacted by the virus because they weren't prepared.
We're talking to Mitch Russo. He's the author of The Invisible Organization, How Ingenious CEOs Are Creating Thriving Virtual Companies. Mitch, what is an invisible organization?
So in the book, I describe how to create a system, and I don't mean just a software or internet-based system, but I'm talking about a communication system. I'm talking about retraining management to see employees and staff in a completely different light. You see, the whole thing about being virtual is not just being separate. It's being together at a higher level. And when we work with clients now, one of the hardest things to do is to help the CEO shift his mindset. And that is a big deal. And that's what a lot of what being invisible is all about. It's understanding that you must now lead at a completely different level in a completely new way. Most CEOs are used to the way that they operate now. They're used to going into an office. They're used to having the accoutrements of the CEO's suite. But now they're home. And now they're trying to lead a company from a spare bedroom, but they don't understand the culture of what they're doing. That's what the invisible organization is about.
Do you think as the companies become more virtual and CEOs take it that way, is it going to phase out kind of the older, less technologically savvy people and just create more room for younger people who are more in touch with the technology? Or how is that going to impact people then?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is the case. And I wouldn't want to be in the commercial real estate business
No.
During a virus like this right now. And besides the obvious reasons why, it's because of what you just said. These businesses are not going to be recovering anytime soon. That's my belief.
Yeah.
My belief is that these businesses are doomed in most cases. Now, there may be cases where that's not going to happen, and maybe half the cases that won't happen. But think about it. Half the commercial real estate is probably going to have to be repurposed soon because of coronavirus. People have learned how easy it is to send people home and still get the productivity, in some cases get more productivity out of them from working from home. So believe me when I tell you, this is a seismic shift that will never be reversed in so many ways.
I hadn't really thought about it before we were talking here, but it's amazing. Even if people work in offices right now, I'm kind of looking at my life and thinking how many people I work with that I've never met before. Like even, the insurance people and so many other businesses that I've been working with that I've never actually met them. It's kind of impressive nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no need to. I mean, other than let them buy you lunch or something, but there's really, think about hiring. And this is one of the big lessons in the Invisible Organization book. What would you rather do? Let's say you had a company, and let's say you were in Indianapolis and you have a nice little business and you need a salesperson. Well, would you rather hire the best salesman in a 50-mile radius, or would you rather hire the best salesman in the world?
Yep.
That's what being invisible does. being invisible gives you options you cannot have being non-visible, being physically situated only. So you can expand so rapidly being virtual versus being physical. So any type of a business where you have salespeople, you have customer service people, or you have anybody who services clients over the phone, there's no possibility of going back to face unless, of course, you just don't know how. But if you do, and if you are smart enough to see what's going on here, I mean, you're gonna do it. And that's why I said commercial real estate is going to be a bad place to invest for the next several years. Also, by the way, I read something this morning about how laptops are suddenly in short supply. Imagine that. We thought the PC was dead. Now laptops are in short supply. Well, guys, I mean, think about how many people were unprepared for all of what's happening, including the laptop vendors for that matter.
Yep.
So, Mitch, how can people perfect the art of being invisible? There are a lot of workers right now who, for the first time in their lives, they're working remote, they're working virtual, they're now essentially invisible. So how can they perfect that art and get better at it?
So let's speak to those folks directly here. So here's what I would say. First of all, understand that no one's going to keep you employed because they like you, because you're a nice guy, because you're pretty or cute or this or that. It's based entirely on performance. Either you perform and deliver or you don't. So in a sense, there might be more pressure on you now working from home than before. The other challenge is culture. Your culture has been to walk out of the house in the morning and leave those beautiful children and wife behind and have your quote unquote peaceful space to work. Well, you may not have that peaceful space right now, but you're going to have to find a way to make it peaceful. You're going to have to find a way to, keep enough. If you're on the phone with clients, you have to find a way to be in a quiet place and have those calls. And by the way, I know folks who have set up a temporary office in their walk-in closet. It's a great place to have a quiet space. And at the same time, it's a great conversation starter. So here I am coming out of the closet this morning to have my coffee and chat with you. I mean, there's so many ways that you could be creative about this, but ultimately the home office, which for me has been a way of life since I'm, for the last 20 plus years, is now going to become more important than ever before. And that means people are going to need to accommodate home offices more than they ever have before. So there will be an up-leveling to some degree of the equipment that we have. You can't really, just hang out with a MacBook Air anymore. You're going to need a couple of screens. You're going to need a higher powered machine. You're going to need, quality telephonic equipment and maybe video and audio equipment. This is all the stuff that really prepares you, and that's what's different. The final thing is culture and the culture of the people who work at your company. It's their responsibility to make sure that the team spirit is kept alive. And what that means is they have to learn to communicate better than they have before at a higher level than before. It didn't work before where you'd send a memo. Now you need to get on video chat and talk to your teams every day if necessary. And you need to share the CEO's why. Why are we in business? Why do we do what we do? And you have to find a way to do that in an inspiring way every single day. You also have to find a way to make sure that people are performing. You can't just say, okay, well, Bob's working from home. Let's hope it works out. No, you have to have software and systems in place to measure performance and monitor it, and to flag the management team when that's not happening. All those pieces are different than what most people are used to.
Yeah, I was actually laughing. I was reading an article, I think it was today, maybe yesterday, about how Walmart and those companies have been reporting that the sales of shirts have boomed, but pants have not. Because people, you can do the video conference in pajama pants, but you need a decent shirt to look at. So that was one thing that I was laughing at there. Sorry,
that's pretty funny.
Just reminded me of that. So I've actually, and Naresh and I have talked about it a little bit before, but I actually think working from home, you'll see more people start to take on multiple jobs because, working in an office, you're there 8 hours, but you're not really working 8 hours. And I think it's going to lead to more competition in the workplace because you're going to have one person realizing, oh, my 8-hour job only really takes me 3 hours. I can go get another full-time job and work 3 or 4 hours a day for them and still be at the same amount of time I am working this one job now. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if it's a low-level job, then I agree with you. But if it's a mid-level or higher-level job, then don't forget, everybody, the playing field has been leveled. We are only going to be basing all of our evaluation of the people in our world on performance only. And if you are used to working 3 hours a day, the guy next to you is going to work 4 and 5, and he's going to outwork you and outperform you, and therefore leave you in the dust and potentially without a job. So it's a delicate balance here. My thinking is that as an employer, you're going to get higher productivity out of the people who work for you. Part of it is based on the simple idea of reciprocity. What I mean is that you are literally giving your staff the chance to save money on commuting, save time on commuting, save expenses related to being physically in an office every day, and allow them to work from home. So there's a feeling, even if someone says, oh, darn, I got to work from home, they're happy. Most people are glad to work from home. The only real obstacle is when you're in such a place where you just don't have the space to have a quiet phone call or the space to set up a chair on a tabletop. I mean, when I was writing the book, I had a little fun with this. I would call up an airline to book a flight or to make believe I was booking a flight. And I would get the agent on the phone and I'd say after, I'm looking to fly to Cincinnati and I want to take 2:00 on this date. I say, by the way, I want to ask you a question. And they'd say, yes. I said, are you working from home? And most of the time people go, well, yeah, I am. I said, really? I said, you must enjoy that a lot. And then that would change the conversation. They go, oh, yes, I love it. I'm sitting here in the kitchen. I get to walk my dog. I get to eat the food I want. I don't have to get in the car. I save an hour and a half on my commute every day. My husband and I have decided to have one car instead of 2 now, and it's actually better. We're saving so much money. I love working from home. Mm-hmm. So this is what is in store for us if we can figure out how to build the culture around this type of a new workforce, how to build the systems and use them in a positive way. If we could do this, by the way, that will be the end of sick days, because what we saw is that when we took a workforce home, nobody worried about working from home if they were sick. In fact, they preferred it. I mean, if they were used to coming into the office, then and they go, boy, I got a sniffle today, or I think I'm coming down with something. I better not go in. Well, for heaven's sakes, they couldn't work from home back then. Now they're encouraged to. So we noticed that several things changed. Sick days disappeared. Attrition disappeared. People kept their jobs longer because they were grateful to have them. Now, my daughter works in Boston for a publisher, and she used to go in every single day to their office, and she has to get on a train and spend $200 a month on T passes and spend 2 hours a day commuting. Well, they sent them all home 2 Mondays ago, and she is happier than ever. Her pay didn't change, but she's saving a small fortune, according to her, and she is more productive than ever before. So this is what's in store for us if we do this right.
Well, following up on Adam's comment, I actually started my company, Christian Media and Marketing, as an independent contractor for one client. So there's full-time employee versus independent contractor. And so when I became an independent contractor, that's when I realized, hey, I was working 8 hours a day at my full-time job. Now I'm only working 2 hours a day. Let's go ahead and pick up another client and another client and another client. And then I incorporated my company and I had a fully functioning business. So how do you think the whole idea of kind of freelancing, being an independent contractor ties into the future of employment?
Well, let's go back before coronavirus. We used to call that, I guess it's still called the gig economy. So what is the gig economy? That basically means that we have people who get a gig. They could be an Uber driver. They could do so many, they could deliver for other companies. They could do all these different things. Well, what happens if the gig economy becomes the economy? Now the opportunities are just huge. And, the IRS, by the way, is freaking out. They don't know how to track this stuff. They don't know how, to collect Social Security and all these other things, because, how do you charge workman's comp when there's no place to work? There's all these complications, but then there's all these benefits too. The quote unquote gig economy has changed the way software systems, SaaS-based products work. I'll give you an example. I had a client who had a customer service oriented business. And when they first hired me, we put in place virtual call center software, which was able to allow them to log in and take calls every day. And then we would track the activity of those calls directly. And all that worked out pretty well. It seemed to be functioning just fine. But then what happened is they couldn't get any more people. So we started doing a search and found products now that were supporting something that was what they called asynchronous participation. So what this means is that this call tracking system, this call center software, which required a VPN on a computer at someone's home, now worked on mobile. Now you could sit in Starbucks and you could pick up your cell phone and you have 15 minutes before your next meeting shows up. You could take 2 customer service calls in 15 minutes on your cell phone, log in, take those calls, log out, get paid. That's what's going on here. There was sort of an interesting, I don't know if any of you guys have gotten that Apple credit card yet. It's kind of hokey, but there was an interesting concept that came out of it. The concept was, we're going to pay you, I think it's every day, on a rebate of 1% of everything that you earn when you charge stuff. Now, it wasn't very exciting to me. I'd rather have the miles anyway, personally. But this idea that you get rewarded instantly has been in so many other parts of our economy and in the world. And all of a sudden now, it's starting to show up in the workforce too. Imagine if you could literally get into your car, drive for Uber, drop off your fare, and see the money in your bank account. That's everything is evolving too. So now it doesn't matter where you work, because you could work at several places and still end up making a great living.
Well, talking about kind of the rules, are you familiar with those rules on hiring someone as a contractor versus as a full-time employee?
Yes, I am very familiar with those rules. And if we're talking to people in the United States, this is where my experience comes from. First of all, never, as an employer, never utter the words independent contractor again, or I will personally come there and chop out your tongue. And here's why. Because it's like a red flag to the IRS. Goes, we should go out and check that guy out, because independent contractors have been used by states and federal agencies to find people who owe employment taxes. That's why we don't do it that way anymore. So what we've done now is we've made everyone become a corporation. And that means everyone who works for you in the gig economy needs to be a company. So my company is called Mindful Guidance LLC. And, I have, and the number of people who work with me for me can vary based on the project I'm doing. So there are times when I have 6 or 8 people, even 10 people that I'm working with, coaches in particular. And there are times when there's nobody working with me. But what this does is it gives me the taxing freedom to hire people who are like me, independent companies. So I'm not paying a person, and this is the key, I'm not paying a person, I'm paying a company. Like if you had someone come and clean your office and you were unhappy with the job they were doing, you would call them up on a Friday and say, look, we're not satisfied with your work. Please don't come anymore. You're fired. Well, nobody cares about that. No one's going to get involved and try and tell you you owe taxes. But if you did that to a person, you're in trouble. But if you turn every person into a company by having them get a federal ID number, then that goes away as a problem. And as long as that person has multiple sources of income, they qualify to be a company. Make sense?
Yeah, it amazes me how people tend to think of, and especially like lenders and everybody tend to think that having your W-2 job is so much more stable than being an independent contractor. We'll just use that term for this conversation, I think, because with like Naresh and myself and you, we have so many different clients that we work with that if I lose one, I lose a small percentage of my income. If my wife loses her W-2 job, we lose 100% of her income. So the whole mindset needs to change of, especially nowadays with at-will employment in a lot of places, your position isn't as safe and your income isn't as safe as you think it is just because you have a W-2. So
true. I mean, look again what happened. I mean, my girlfriend's significant other is a wait staff individual, and all of a sudden now that's gone, completely gone. Mm-hmm. I mean, and the amazing thing was that the week before that was $1,000 a week position, and now it's zero. So if you're not prepared, if you don't understand, if you're not agile enough to understand that everything can and likely will change, then, you're not prepared. I know I am. I know you guys are. Listeners, you need to stay prepared. You need to think, what are the things, what are my skills? What are my superpowers? How can I monetize these? What can I do to help other people and in turn get paid?
All right, Mitch, we're going to stop there for today. Just wanted to thank you for coming on the Work From Home show. Everybody, go to his websites. That's mitchrusso.com, mitchrusso.com, or theinvisibleorganization.com. You can also go check us out, workfromhomeshow.com, workfromhomeshow.com. If you have any questions for us, feel free to give us an email, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. hello@workfromhomeshow.com. Mitch will be joining us on our episode coming out this Friday. And until then, keep on working from home.